the level of attention my parents gave to scripture, I feel like is what laid the foundation for my faith. And not only that they gave, but they kind of expected of us. One of the things I always appreciated growing up is that it wasn't just like my parents weren't content to read about scripture, to read a popular devotional book that, is interpreting scripture, or to read a commentary on it. But like they wanted us and to read scripture and to memorize scripture verses. And I mean, growing up, I remember, we didn't do this as much at home, but at certain Bible camps we go to, what was an activity called sword drills, where you're told a verse and you're supposed to see who can be the first to find it and then read it. I mean, so it was as common as breathing. It was just like part of the experience. And I mean, I think because of that, I think because of that, also because I had a couple of friends, who we were all kind of competitive with each other, and some of them like knew their Bibles really well. I mean, it's like that proverb, like iron sharpens iron. And so we would really, there's just like that natural competitiveness there. I mean, there was one side of it, it's like who could be the best at scripture. And I think sure there's like an element of pride there, but there is a good that came from that, which was, I mean, I felt like I had a strong mastery of like the story of the Bible. I mean, I feel like at least on 2, maybe 3 occasions, like reading the Bible from cover to cover, memorizing all these different verses, knowing like the obscure passages or stories, etc. And so what's interesting to me looking back is it's not as if I needed to relearn scripture, when I started to look at the Catholic faith. It's more I had to kind of start looking at it a different way. Or I guess for me is looking at it more and being more honest with myself and recognizing that the interpretations I had heard growing up, like I knew the Bible verses, but then I started to realize, the interpretations were sometimes selective about the Bible verses, and they might ignore this one over here or didn't have a good explanation for that one over here. And so as I became Catholic, I guess it's almost like they both enriched each other. Like my becoming Catholic helped to enrich my reading of scripture, things that I had, read about or understood, like, or were confused about, suddenly made so much more sense. I mean, especially I think, we talk about the big one. It's often Catholic converts often talk about the big ones, like, the John 6, this is my body, unless you eat my body, or the renaming of Peter. But those are big ones because they're really weird passages if you're not Catholic, and you have to, I feel like, jump through some hoops to try to understand what's going on there. Or reading through the book of Acts, you kind of see, oh, wow, Peter plays a very prominent role here. And there are differences in like the way apostles, what they get to do and then what everybody else does, and the deacons. And there is kind of a hierarchy emerging. So, but by the same token, then my having been bathed in scripture as a kid, like, helped me to, I don't know, kind of, I think have a better understanding of what's going on at Mass and what's going on in, just kind of like in the theology of the church. Like it was so much easier for me to kind of like unpack and read and digest because I had this strong foundation of scriptural literacy. I think there were some Bible verses that came up that, we wouldn't have, like, that may sound too Catholic. I mean, in particular, like the James, faith without works is dead. But there was enough like wiggle room there that you could still make that argument. Yeah, but it's still based on faith. There is still kind of this principle of, and I think the other explanation, is, but if you really believe, then you will do the good works. So it's not, anyway. But there were passages that I think, we would talk through and wrestle with and entertain. And because we were doing it in kind of this, we're on our own sola scriptura, at some points we just have to put them aside. I think in particular, the 2 particular passages that come to mind is we were starting to do a study on like kind of the basic doctrines. So the first one being the idea of original sin. And I remember, I think I was a young teenager then, so maybe like 13, 14. And I believe this was in our home church stage. And so we're reading through kind of the doctrine, well, the Bible verses that give right to sin, especially if you read through it as a story. And I remember posing the question as the kid, like, well, does this mean God made sin? Because like he makes an apple that's then the cause of sin and everything. And also that was part of my temperament, is like wanting to kind of push the edge of like, let's take something to its logical extremes. And honestly, I don't remember how we answered that question at the moment. I think at the end, like we recognized, like, no, that doesn't make sense for God to make sin. But also, I don't think that like some of the language of theology that we have today, or that it's easy to make use of in the context of tradition, like the idea of free will and the idea of, and like what that really means. We didn't have recourse to that. On the one hand, I really appreciate that I was driven to kind of have like this strong immersion in scripture. But then at the end of the day, I recognize there was something that fell short of, especially like the whole idea of sola scriptura, like that wasn't enough. And so as a parent, and I also recognize, I think I've had some failings, maybe some laziness too. I've recognized I haven't like asked my kids to kind of do the sword drills or know all the books of their Bible by the time they're 6 or 10 or what have you. I'm like, I haven't like expected that of them in the same way that I was. But at the same time, I've also thought, but I want them to kind of first, before they're like dependent upon the scripture, first like come to the church. And like, so that's where it starts. It starts in this community, which is still living in present, but then is connected to the past. And then seeing how scripture is meted out, and in its own particular pattern, at the Mass and with the kind of readings of the week, or the readings of Sunday. I think the one insight that struck me the most is care for the poor. And I guess it's not really an insight, but it's more of like, just my oldest, even at an early age, she just had like, I don't know, just this understanding, like someone in need, we're supposed to take care of them. And I do think she kind of came to that, I think just from kind of, it wouldn't surprise me. It's kind of from a life of the church perspective. Like I think when you're, because in the church, we do kind of draw emphasis to biblical passages like the works of mercy, but then we kind of highlight it more by giving them that term, works of mercy, and one of them being caring for the poor. So I think in some regards, kind of her lived theology, like living that out in practice and being more aware of that, has been an example for me. Like I think growing up, I don't think we really talked too much about how do we like take care of the poor in like a real concrete sense. My parents were very generous people and had given to a lot of organizations, but now it was cool to see. And I can't remember when my oldest was, I think 6 or 7. She just had this like heart for the poor and a heart for those in need. So that may be, I feel like, one insight that I've observed.